When a cold-hearted billionaire had his loyal maid arrested for a crime she didn't commit, no one imagined his 6-year-old daughter would walk into the courtroom, face the judge and say, "Free my mommy, and I'll heal you." The entire room had burst into laughter that day. Reporters chuckled, lawyers exchanged looks. Even the prosecutor smiled, dismissing it as childish nonsense. But days later, that same judge, paralyzed for years, stood on his own 2 feet. The world gasped. Before we unfold what happened next, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, like the video, and tell us where you're watching from. We always love hearing that. Alexander Kane was a billionaire whose name carried weight in every business magazine on earth. Founder of Kane Technologies, the man had built his empire from scratch, a global giant of innovation and fortune. But behind the walls of the Kane estate, far from the flashes of success, lived a silence so deep it felt like grief itself. After his wife, Evelyn, died giving birth to their daughter, Alexander closed himself off from everything human. He buried his pain beneath meetings, mergers, and money. His life became one long calendar of deadlines. Inside the mansion's glass walls, his empire glittered, but the warmth of home had vanished. His daughter Lily was 6. She grew up surrounded by screens, servants, and silence. The estate looked perfect. Marble floors, gold-edged furniture, abstract art. But something essential was missing. No laughter, no comfort, just the hum of electronics and the echo of footsteps on cold stone. Alexander believed he was doing everything right. He gave Lily everything money could buy: food, clothes, dolls, tutors, but never himself. When he passed her in the hallways, his words were few. "Did you eat? Good. Don't forget your lessons." She'd nod, clutching her toys, trying to find meaning in the quiet. Her mornings were the same every day: a nanny helping her dress, breakfast in silence, and then long hours wandering through the enormous house with no one to talk to. Her favorite corner was by the tall glass windows overlooking Rosewood Garden. She'd press her hand against the cool glass, watching trees sway, hoping someone, anyone, would arrive. But no one ever did. Lily often sat on her bed surrounded by dolls, pretending they were her family. She'd give each one a voice, her mother's, her father's, her own, and invent stories where they talked, laughed, and lived together. Sometimes she whispered toward her mother's framed photo on the nightstand, "Would you read to me if you were here? Do you think Daddy still loves me?" The photo never answered. Alexander, meanwhile, was never cruel, just absent. He stayed locked in his office, voice echoing through speaker calls, face glowing under monitor light. When night came, he'd stand outside Lily's room, listening to her soft sobs, but he never opened the door. He didn't know how to be the man she needed, only the man he had trained himself to be, and so life inside the Kane estate fell into a rhythm of loneliness. Every nanny who arrived soon quit. Some said the house felt cursed, others said they couldn't stand the silence. The housekeeper, Mrs. Turner, tried to explain it to him once. "Sir, the house doesn't need more staff. It needs you." But Alexander simply nodded, distracted, and returned to his calls. By the time Lily turned 6, even the staff had stopped trying to fill the emotional void. They spoke in low tones, moved quietly through the marble corridors, and treated laughter like a disturbance. The child, bright and curious, was fading into quiet despair. Then, one rainy morning, Mrs. Turner sat in the kitchen, flipping through agency listings. She had called every domestic service in Riverton, every nanny placement she could find. Most refused after hearing about the Kane estate's reputation. "High pay, low happiness," one agency said. But then, near the bottom of the list, she found one more name: Clara Evans. Clara wasn't impressive on paper. No degrees from elite schools. No glowing references from upper-class families. Her resume was simple: 6 years of domestic work, kind personality, good with children. When Mrs. Turner called, Clara's voice was calm, low, and steady. "I don't need luxury," she said. Just honesty. Something about that answer stayed with Mrs. Turner. The next day, she arranged an interview. Clara arrived at the gates of the Kane estate carrying a small brown suitcase and an umbrella that had lost 2 spokes. She wore plain clothes, nothing fashionable, but her eyes carried something rare, gentleness without fear. When she entered the grand marble hallway, she didn't look impressed. She didn't gasp at the chandelier or comment on the paintings. She simply smiled at Mrs. Turner and said, "It's a big place, but I think children don't care about size, only warmth." Mrs. Turner's expression softened. "Then maybe you're the right one," she said quietly. No one inside that house knew it yet, but the quiet woman who had just crossed the threshold would change everything. Not with power, not with money, but with the kind of kindness the Kane estate hadn't seen in years. Clara Evans began her first morning at the Kane estate quietly. She didn't arrive with big smiles or loud introductions. She simply observed. Her footsteps were light against the marble floor, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She listened when people spoke and never interrupted. Within a day, she knew where every light switch was, which doors creaked, and which rooms felt colder than the rest. She noticed small details others missed. How Lily's shoes were always left in perfect pairs by the stairs, how the breakfast table was too large for one child, how the sound of the elevator made her flinch slightly. Unlike the nannies before her, Clara didn't treat her job like a contract to survive. She treated it like a promise. That first afternoon, while slicing apples in the kitchen, she sensed eyes on her. Turning slightly, she saw Lily standing by the doorway, half hiding behind the frame. Her blonde hair was messy, her small hands clutching the corner of her dress. Clara smiled gently but didn't speak. Instead, she took an apple slice, placed it on a small plate, and slid it forward on the counter. "Would you like one?" Lily hesitated, then nodded. She stepped closer, her tiny fingers brushing the plate. She didn't say thank you. She just stood there quietly munching, watching the stranger who didn't rush her. That moment, small, simple, silent, became the beginning of something extraordinary. Over the next few days, Lily began following Clara around the house. She trailed behind her in the hallways, peeked from corners while Clara cleaned, and sometimes just sat nearby without saying a word. Clara didn't chase her away or force conversation. She simply allowed her to exist beside her, as if silence itself was welcome. Then one afternoon, Lily finally spoke. "Can you help me pick a dress?" Clara paused, smiled softly and nodded. "Of course." She walked to the child's wardrobe, a room-sized closet filled with silk, lace and labels. Lily pointed shyly to a yellow dress with a missing ribbon. Clara knelt, inspecting it. "This one's been loved," she said. "Let's fix it together." From that day onward, Lily's room, once just a museum of untouched toys, began to echo with quiet laughter. Clara didn't fill it with noise, but with calm presence. She read to Lily at night, let her choose the stories, and paused whenever the child wanted to ask questions. Sometimes Lily's questions were simple. "Why is the moon white?" And sometimes painfully deep. "Do mommies ever come back?" Clara never lied. She would take a breath and answer honestly, with care. Sometimes not. But love doesn't leave, even when people do. Slowly, Lily started to change. The quiet child who once stared at walls began to smile. She talked more. She ran through hallways without fear. The housekeeper noticed it first. "She's humming again," Mrs. Turner whispered, wiping her eyes. Even Alexander, busy as ever, noticed the shift in air. He would pass the living room and hear Lily's giggles, soft, fragile things that used to be extinct in the Kane estate. Once, he paused at the doorway, watching Clara and his daughter sitting cross-legged on the rug, surrounded by storybooks and crayons. Clara listened as Lily explained her imaginary family, a mother, father and kitten who all lived in a tiny toy house. Alexander stood there for several seconds, something heavy in his chest. Then he quietly stepped away. Days became weeks, and the mansion itself began to breathe differently. The silence that once pressed on the walls now felt lighter. The rhythm of footsteps, the scent of home-cooked food, even the distant hum of Alexander's office. Everything felt softer. Clara had not only restored order, she had brought something back that everyone had forgotten how to name. Peace. She never boasted. She never complained. She simply did what needed to be done, folding clothes, helping Lily study, cooking light meals when the chef was away. But her real work wasn't in chores. It was in healing the house one small moment at a time. At night, when she tucked Lily into bed, the child no longer stared at the ceiling. She waited for Clara to open a book. The voice that read those words, calm, deliberate, motherly, filled the emptiness with meaning. One night, after Clara finished reading The Velveteen Rabbit, Lily didn't move. She reached up, touched Clara's sleeve, and whispered something so small it almost vanished into the air. "Good night, Mommy." Clara froze. The word hit her like a slow wave. She hadn't expected it. Her throat tightened. For a few seconds she couldn't breathe. She wasn't Lily's mother. She knew that. But something about the innocence in the child's voice made her heart ache in a way she hadn't felt in years. Her eyes burned, but she didn't let the tears fall. She leaned closer, brushed Lily's hair back, and whispered, "Good night, sweetheart." Then she sat there long after the girl had fallen asleep, staring at the faint moonlight spilling across the floor. In that moment, something inside Clara changed. She had come to this house for a job, but what she had found was something far more fragile and sacred. A child who still believed love could return if someone just stayed long enough. The next morning, Clara woke before sunrise. The house was still quiet, the kind of silence that once felt suffocating but now held something gentler. She moved softly through the halls, checking rooms, straightening cushions, opening the curtains to let in the early gold of dawn. In Lily's room, the little girl was still asleep, her small hand resting on the edge of her storybook. Clara smiled faintly. She remembered the whispered word from last night, "Mommy," and felt her heart tighten again. It wasn't a word she'd ever expected to hear, not in this life, not from this child, she whispered to herself. "You're just her caretaker." But her heart didn't listen. Later that morning, Lily ran into the kitchen still wearing her pajamas. "Can we make pancakes?" she asked, her voice brighter than usual. Clara nodded. "Only if you help me mix the batter." The kitchen, once sterile and silent, now carried the rhythm of laughter. Flour dust floated in sunlight, and Lily's small hands clumsily stirred the bowl while Clara held it steady. "You're a natural chef," Clara teased. "Maybe I should retire early," Lily giggled. "You can't retire. You're my—" She stopped herself, blushing. Clara didn't press her. She just smiled and said, "Your friend?" Lily nodded quickly. Even though they both knew it wasn't the word she wanted to use, their bond deepened over time. They spent afternoons in Rosewood Garden, planting seeds in the dirt, their hands covered in soil. Clara taught Lily patience, how plants, like people, needed care, quiet, and sunlight to grow. Every evening they would water the tiny sprouts together, watching green tips push through the earth. For the first time since Evelyn's death, laughter began returning to the Kane estate like sunlight breaking through old dust. Mrs. Turner noticed it first. "It feels alive again," she said softly, glancing at Clara across the hall. "You've done something no one else could, but not everyone was ready to feel at peace." Alexander had started noticing things, changes both in the house and within himself. The estate was quieter yet warmer. Lily was happier, brighter. He caught himself smiling more, though he didn't know why. One evening, he passed by the garden window and saw Clara and Lily sitting under a tree, heads bent together over a picture book. Lily's tiny hand rested on Clara's knee, and Clara's face, calm, serene, glowed in the fading light. Alexander paused, then walked away, his chest tightening with something he couldn't name. He didn't trust feelings. Feelings made people weak. Feelings had destroyed him once. Still, he found himself glancing toward the kitchen in the mornings just to catch a glimpse of Clara pouring orange juice or tying Lily's hair. He noticed the calm precision in her movements, how she didn't try to impress anyone, how she didn't fill the air with meaningless words. She was, he realized, the opposite of everything his world had become. Days turned into weeks. The Kane estate, once a monument to isolation, had become a quiet home. Even the staff worked differently now. They spoke softer, smiled more, stayed longer in rooms they once hurried through, and for the first time, Alexander began to feel the weight of his own absence. He would watch from the shadows of doorways, a man too proud to admit what he saw. His daughter's joy, reborn not because of wealth or comfort, but because of a woman who simply stayed. Then came the evening that changed everything. Alexander returned from a 3-day trip to San Francisco, exhausted, irritable, lost in spreadsheets and phone calls. The house seemed peaceful, but something in him felt restless. As he poured himself a drink, his eyes fell on the painting above his desk, a portrait of Evelyn. He hadn't looked at it closely in years. On impulse, he walked to the safe hidden behind the wall panel and entered the code. Inside, beneath old files and family documents, sat a small black box, Evelyn's diamond necklace, the last piece of her he had left. Only, when he opened the box, it was empty. For a moment, he thought he'd made a mistake. He checked the drawers, the cabinets, even the locked chest at the foot of his bed. Nothing. The necklace was gone. The silence in the room grew heavy. He sat at his desk, staring at the empty case. His pulse quickened. He called Mrs. Turner to his office and asked, "Who entered this room while I was gone?" She looked startled. "No one, sir. We all know your study is off limits." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Check with the staff, every one of them." An hour later, she returned with the same answer. No one had been inside. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. His mind churned through possibilities. Theft, mistake, betrayal? He called his lawyer, Benjamin Cole, a sharp, confident man who'd advised him for years. Benjamin arrived early the next morning. After hearing the story, he leaned back in his chair and said, "It's likely someone in your household, Alex. Someone who knew about the safe." "Someone trusted," Alexander frowned. "That narrows it down to the housekeeper, or..." His voice trailed off. Benjamin didn't hesitate. "Or the maid. Clara." The name echoed in his mind, and something inside him recoiled, but doubt had already crept in. Benjamin continued calmly, "She's close to your daughter. Too close, if I may say. Emotional attachment clouds judgment. Maybe she didn't plan to steal. Maybe it just happened." Alexander said nothing. He didn't believe it, not fully, but he couldn't dismiss it either. The missing necklace, the silence, the trust. It all tangled together in his mind like threads pulling towards suspicion. By midnight, the decision was made. He would find the truth, no matter the cost. The next morning, Alexander Kane sat in his study, the empty velvet box open before him like an accusation. The diamond necklace, Evelyn's, was gone. The last remnant of a woman he had once loved beyond reason. The house seemed too still. Every tick of the clock sounded like mockery. He began asking quiet questions, calm, measured, polite. To Mrs. Turner, to the chef, to the cleaners, his voice carried authority, but beneath it lay a quiet storm. "Did anyone enter my office?" "No, sir." "Did anyone touch the wall panel?" "No, sir." Every answer led to the same dead end. Finally, he called the one man whose advice he trusted without question, Benjamin Cole. His lawyer, his confidant, the man who had once stood beside him through mergers and lawsuits alike. Benjamin arrived that afternoon, perfectly pressed suit, calm expression, and the kind of tone that made bad news sound logical. He listened carefully, hands folded. Then, after a long silence, he said, Alexander, it's never easy to hear this, but sometimes betrayal comes from those we least expect. Alexander frowned. You're saying someone inside this house? Benjamin nodded slowly. Think about it. Who has access to your private space? Who could have learned about the safe? Not the housekeeper, she's too old, too cautious. But the new maid, Clara. Alexander's tone cracked slightly. Benjamin leaned back, calm and deliberate. She's close to your daughter. Too close. Trust me, I've seen this before. Emotional manipulation. It starts innocent, but once someone gains your child's confidence, they gain access to everything. Alexander said nothing. He stared out the window toward Rosewood Garden, where Lily and Clara were sitting under the oak tree, reading together. For a long moment, he felt two truths fighting inside him. The warmth Clara had brought into their lives, and the cold logic Benjamin laid before him. By evening, logic won. He ordered the security team to pull every second of surveillance footage from the past week. Every hallway, every entrance, every shadow. He wanted proof, not guesses. The team spent hours reviewing the recordings. Clara appeared in frame dozens of times, folding laundry, helping Lily, carrying trays. Always calm, always ordinary, nothing incriminating, nothing at all. But instead of reassuring him, the absence of evidence unsettled Alexander even more. A careful thief wouldn't get caught on camera, Benjamin reminded him quietly. And she's been here long enough to know where every blind spot is. The words dug deep. The next day, Alexander made a decision he would soon regret for the rest of his life. He called the Riverton Police Department. By mid-afternoon, 2 officers arrived at the Kane estate. Their knock echoed down the marble halls. The housekeeper answered, trembling. Clara was in the kitchen with Lily, pouring juice into a glass when the officers entered. "Ma'am, we need to ask you a few questions," one of them said. Clara looked up, startled but calm. "Of course. Is something wrong?" Before she could finish, the second officer stepped forward, his voice clipped and official. "You're being taken into custody on suspicion of theft involving a missing family heirloom." The color drained from her face. "What? That's a mistake." They didn't explain further. "You can clarify everything at the station." Lily froze, confusion flooding her eyes. "What's happening?" Clara turned toward her, trying to smile, but her lips trembled. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's just a misunderstanding." One officer took Clara by the arm. The metallic click of handcuffs broke the air. Lily's breath hitched. "No, let her go!" She ran forward, clutching Clara's sleeve, crying uncontrollably. "Please, she didn't do anything." The officers hesitated. "Ma'am, we need her to cooperate." Clara knelt, despite the cuffs, and looked Lily straight in the eyes. Her voice stayed calm, even as tears burned behind her lashes. "You need to be brave for me, okay?" Lily shook her head. "I don't understand." Alexander appeared at the doorway then, his presence filling the room like ice. He didn't meet Clara's eyes. He only gave a small nod to the officers, signaling them to proceed. Lily turned to him, desperate. "Daddy, stop them." "She's my friend. She didn't steal anything." He didn't answer. Not a word. As Clara was led away, Lily screamed again, her small voice echoing down the grand corridor. "Please, Daddy, don't let them take her." But Alexander didn't move. He just stood there watching, while the woman who had saved his daughter's light was dragged out of the house in handcuffs. The silence that followed was unbearable. By the time the police car pulled away from the gates, Lily was pressed against the window, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Mrs. Turner stood behind her, whispering prayers under her breath. Inside the car, Clara sat motionless, staring out the window. Her wrists ached, but that wasn't what hurt most. What hurt was the look in Lily's eyes, confusion, betrayal, heartbreak. At the station, she was fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in a small grey cell. The night was long and cold. She barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lily crying and Alexander's face, cold, unreadable. By morning, she was brought to the courthouse for her preliminary hearing. The media had already caught wind of the scandal. Billionaire's maid accused of theft. Cameras flashed as officers led her through the side entrance. Inside the courtroom, Judge William Hayes presided, a man known for his stern expression and quiet authority. He had been paralyzed from the waist down for years, confined to a wheelchair, but his voice carried more power than most men standing. Clara sat silently at the defense table, wrists trembling, head lowered. The crowd murmured, and then, at the very back of the courtroom, a small figure slipped inside. Lily Kane, escorted by one of the security guards. She wasn't supposed to be there, but no one had the heart to stop her. She took a seat, her legs swinging nervously, her eyes fixed on Clara. The hearing began. Legal words filled the air. Charges, custody, possession. But to Lily, it all sounded meaningless. All she knew was that the person who had brought her happiness was being treated like a criminal, and no one was doing anything about it. She gripped the edge of the bench, her small body shaking, her heart pounding with a kind of courage no adult had taught her. Something inside her had already decided. She wasn't going to stay quiet this time. The courtroom had never felt so silent. The air was heavy, a strange, expectant stillness hanging over rows of strangers. Judge William Hayes adjusted his glasses and called the room to order. His voice, low and steady, carried across the polished wooden walls. "We'll begin the hearing for Clara Evans, charged under suspicion of theft." Clara stood slowly, her hands trembling. Her public attorney whispered for her to stay calm, but her mind was miles away, back in the kitchen, where Lily had been crying as the officers took her away. From the corner of her eye, she saw movement. A small figure, blonde hair, pink dress, slipping down the aisle. Lily. The child's steps were quiet, but they echoed in that room like thunder. A security guard tried to stop her, but she pulled free, her small shoes tapping rapidly against the floor. Gasps broke through the silence. Before anyone could react, Lily had reached the front of the courtroom. She climbed the first step to the judge's bench and looked up, her face streaked with tears. Judge Hayes froze, completely unprepared for what came next. The little girl took a deep breath, voice shaking but clear. "If you let my mommy go," she said softly, "I'll help you walk again." The words fell into the silence like a spark into dry air. For a moment, no one breathed. Then murmurs rippled through the courtroom, disbelief, confusion, shock. Reporters scrambled for their phones, fingers shaking. Clara's hands shot to her mouth. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. "Lily," she whispered under her breath. The judge blinked once, twice. He didn't speak. The child's small hands were gripping his, warm, steady, fearless. "I can help you," Lily repeated, her voice trembling now. "But please, please let her go. She didn't take anything." Judge Hayes sat frozen. The world around him blurred, the murmuring lawyers, the shifting crowd, the flashes of cameras. All he saw was a little girl who wasn't supposed to be brave, but was. He'd been a man of rules all his life. Law, logic, and restraint. But this moment, this raw, innocent truth, struck deeper than any argument ever could. After several seconds, he nodded slightly. His voice softened. "Bailiff, clear the room for recess." Gasps again. The hearing was paused. People began moving, whispering, calling newsrooms. The sound of phones clicking filled the hallway. Reporters had caught every second. Within minutes, the clip had spread online. Little girl stops courtroom with her words. Inside, Clara sat down slowly, her knees weak. A tear slipped down her cheek. Not from fear this time, but from something else. Hope. Lily was guided back to her seat beside the guard, her face flushed, her hands still trembling. She looked across the room toward Clara and gave a small, brave nod. Clara mouthed, "Thank you." Outside the courthouse, chaos had already begun. Crowds gathered shouting questions, holding up phones. Headlines appeared within minutes. Child's promise shakes courtroom. Judge Hayes, stunned by girl's words. Who is Clara Evans? By the time the court resumed, the case had already shifted in tone. Judge Hayes' expression had changed. The authority was still there, but something new flickered behind his eyes. Curiosity and compassion. He looked at the file before him, flipping through reports, statements, and the initial evidence, or lack of it. He spoke slowly, but his voice carried meaning now. This hearing has revealed not only emotion, but concern regarding due process. Therefore, I'm ordering a full re-examination of the case. The courtroom murmured again. Clara's lawyer blinked in disbelief. Hayes continued, "The defendant will remain under supervision, but I see no cause for continued detention until further evidence is reviewed." Her attorney stood. "Your Honor, may we request release pending investigation?" The judge nodded once. "Approved." A collective breath swept the room. Clara covered her face, shaking silently. Lily didn't wait for permission. She ran forward again, past the startled officers, straight into Clara's arms. The embrace was pure emotion. The crowd went still. No one dared to interrupt. Clara held her tightly, whispering through tears, "I don't know how you did that, sweetheart." "But thank you." Lily's reply was simple. "I meant it." Judge Hayes looked away, clearing his throat, pretending to review paperwork. But his hands trembled slightly on the bench. Something inside him, something long dormant, had moved. When the hearing ended, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Flashes filled the air as Clara walked out, Lily's hand gripping hers tightly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The image of a child holding her mother's hand said everything words could not. That night, Clara returned to the Kane estate under temporary release. The house was quiet again, but not peaceful. Alexander sat in the living room, the TV replaying the footage of Lily's outburst again and again. The world had already turned the story into a headline. "Billionaire's daughter saves her maid." Alexander's jaw clenched as he watched the replay. Lily standing before the judge, Clara weeping behind her. He couldn't look away. He muted the television and sat there for a long time, head in his hands. Guilt began to bloom, slow, poisonous, impossible to silence. Upstairs, Lily sat awake by her window, looking at the stars. She didn't care about news cameras or headlines. She just wanted things to feel right again. And though she didn't know it yet, her promise, that one small sentence, had already started something that would change every life it touched. The Kane estate felt different that night. The walls still gleamed with the same light. The clocks still ticked with the same rhythm. Yet something inside those walls had broken. Trust. Clara had been released. But the air between everyone was fragile, thin, uncertain. Even Lily, who had fought for her with everything she had, moved quietly through the halls, as if afraid to disturb something invisible. Clara stayed in the guest wing. Though she was back under the same roof, she could feel the difference. The glances from the staff were mixed. Sympathy, confusion, and fear. The world outside called her innocent, but inside the Kane estate, silence lingered like a ghost. Lily didn't care about that. She only cared that Clara was home. She followed her from room to room, always staying close, but never saying too much. Clara would smile softly and act normal, cooking, tidying, folding, but the light in her eyes was dimmer now. And Alexander, he was a storm behind glass. He watched the news on repeat. The video of his daughter's trembling voice before Judge Hayes, her small hands on the bench, her plea echoing through the courtroom. Every time he saw it, shame carved deeper into him. He had wanted proof, and in his blindness, he had almost destroyed the only two people who still had hearts big enough to forgive him. Reporters camped outside the gates for days. Cameras flashed, questions flew. "Mr. Kane, do you believe Clara's innocent?" "What do you say about your daughter's promise?" He said nothing. Behind the locked doors of his office, he sat in silence. Every number on his screens, every stock, every figure, now looked meaningless. The world he'd built suddenly felt hollow. Across the hall, Lily lay awake. She stared at the moonlight tracing patterns on her ceiling, her mind full of thoughts too heavy for a child. She remembered the way Clara had looked in handcuffs. The way her father had turned away. It didn't make sense. None of it. Clara wasn't a thief. She knew that the way she knew the sun would rise, which meant someone else was lying. The thought began as a whisper, then grew louder every night until it was all she could think about. One evening, while passing by her father's office, she overheard him talking to Benjamin Cole. His voice was low but sharp. "I did what had to be done," Alexander said. "I trusted the evidence." Benjamin's calm reply followed. "You trusted instinct, not facts." Lily froze by the doorway, listening. Her small fingers tightened on the frame. She waited until Benjamin left before slipping quietly inside. Her father's office smelled of whiskey and paper, heavy, still, untouched. She looked around. Files, drawers, locked cabinets. Clara's voice echoed in her mind. "Sometimes the truth isn't far. You just have to look in the right place." That night, when everyone was asleep, Lily returned. She tiptoed barefoot across the cold marble floor, her flashlight trembling in her hand. She climbed into the leather chair and began opening drawers one by one, slowly, carefully. Most were filled with business papers, contracts, old photos of her parents. She didn't understand most of it, but she kept looking. Hours passed, nothing. She was about to give up when she noticed something, a folder slightly sticking out from behind a locked cabinet. She tugged, but it wouldn't move. The cabinet was sealed. Above it, a red light blinked softly. The server system. That's when she remembered Carl, the old security technician who used to give her chocolate whenever he visited. He'd shown her how the cameras worked once. Her heart raced. Maybe the cameras had seen something her father hadn't. The next day, she found his old number written on the back of a maintenance note in the kitchen. She stared at it for a long time before picking up the landline and dialing. "Hello?" The familiar, warm voice answered. "Carl, it's Lily," she whispered. There was a pause. "Lily Kane? My God, kiddo. You've grown. How are you?" Her voice trembled. "I need your help." "But you can't tell anyone," Carl hesitated. "What kind of help?" "I think my dad made a mistake," she said softly. "I need to see the camera videos from when he was gone." There was a long silence. Then Carl sighed. "Where do you want to meet?" "Behind the garden gate. Tonight." That evening, while the house slept, Lily slipped out again. The garden was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of rain-soaked roses. Carl was waiting near the fence, holding a flashlight. He looked older than she remembered, but his eyes were still kind. She told him everything, about the missing necklace, the arrest, and how she wanted to find proof. Carl frowned. "That's a dangerous thing you're doing, kid," but he looked at her, seeing the same determination that had once belonged to her mother. "You're right. Let's check." He used his technician's ID to access the private server. Inside the dark study, he pulled up weeks of archived footage. Together, they scanned through hours of silence, corridors, hallways, empty rooms, until finally they found it. The feed from the night her father was in San Francisco. There, in the hallway outside Alexander's office, Benjamin Cole, calm, composed, looking over his shoulder before entering. Carl froze the frame. "That's your dad's lawyer, isn't it?" Lily's heart pounded. "Play it." Benjamin walked straight to the safe. His movements were confident, practiced, as if he knew exactly where everything was. He opened the hidden panel, reached inside, and removed something small and dark. The video ended. Carl exhaled. "That's your thief." Lily didn't speak. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes stayed fixed on the screen. She finally whispered, "We have to show them." Carl copied the video onto a pen drive. sealed it in a small plastic bag, and handed it to her. "Keep this safe," he said. She nodded, her small fingers gripping the drive like it was life itself. That night, for the first time in weeks, she didn't cry. She didn't even sleep. She just sat by her window, staring at the moonlight, knowing she had found the truth, and knowing exactly what she had to do next. For the next 2 days, Lily couldn't bring herself to speak to her father. Every time she saw him, she turned away. When he entered a room, she quietly left. Her eyes, once bright with curiosity, now carried distance, the same distance he had shown her for years. Alexander noticed. He tried knocking on her door. "Lily," he called softly. "Can we talk?" No answer. He left food outside her room, hoping she'd at least eat something. But by morning, the plate was still there, untouched. He didn't know it yet, but she wasn't avoiding him out of fear. It was disappointment, the kind a child shouldn't have to carry. Down the hall, Clara watched in silence. She could see the wall forming between father and daughter, but she didn't interfere. She still felt fragile in this house, half forgiven, half distrusted. But when Lily slipped her a quiet look, Clara understood. The girl was planning something, and she wasn't wrong. The pen drive Carl had given Lily was hidden deep inside her backpack. She checked on it every night, making sure it was still there. The thought of what it held, Benjamin Cole opening that safe, burned in her mind. But Lily knew showing her father wasn't enough. He had already been wrong once. This time, she needed someone who couldn't ignore the truth. That night, she wrote a note in her small handwriting, "Please watch this. It's important." She slipped the pen drive into a plain white envelope, sealed it, and waited for morning. The next day, Lily asked Mrs. Turner to take her into town. "I need a new storybook," she said innocently. The housekeeper smiled, unaware. "Of course, dear." But instead of going to the bookstore, Lily asked to be dropped off near the Riverton courthouse. Mrs. Turner hesitated, but gave in when Lily promised it would only take a few minutes. Lily climbed the courthouse steps alone, clutching the envelope to her chest. Inside, she approached the district attorney's office. A secretary looked up. "Sweetheart, you can't be here," she said gently. "Where are your parents?" Lily's voice was steady. "This is for the judge. It's about Clara Evans." Her tone was so firm, so unshakable, that the secretary didn't argue. She passed the note to a junior attorney in the next room. He stepped out, surprised to see a child waiting by the desk. "This must be a mistake," he murmured, opening the envelope. Inside was the USB and Lily's note. He frowned, turned to his computer, and plugged it in. Within seconds, the screen came alive. Benjamin Cole appeared, calm and methodical, walking into Alexander Kane's office at night. He looked around once before opening the wall panel, entering the safe, and pulling something out. The necklace. The attorney froze. His chair creaked. "Oh my God," he whispered. He played the clip twice just to be sure. Then he called for his superior. Within an hour, the evidence had been sent to Judge William Hayes. When Hayes received the file, he watched it in silence. The room around him seemed to fade. He leaned closer to the screen, eyes narrowing as Benjamin's figure moved with practiced confidence, revealing the truth piece by piece. The footage didn't just show theft, it showed betrayal, manipulation, and the quiet collapse of an innocent life. When it ended, the judge exhaled slowly and sat back in his chair. He remained that way for several long minutes. Then he pressed the intercom. "Call the prosecution. We're reopening the case." Within hours, an emergency review was scheduled. The footage was authenticated and confirmed by digital analysts. The evidence was irrefutable. Benjamin Cole had stolen the necklace himself and framed Clara Evans to cover his tracks. Judge Hayes' voice was firm as he signed the order. "All charges against the defendant are hereby dropped." By evening, Clara was free. Word spread fast. Crowds gathered outside the Riverton Correctional Center, holding signs that read, "Justice for Clara" and "Believe the Innocent." Cameras rolled as the gates opened. Clara stepped out, dressed in the same plain clothes she had been arrested in, her eyes blinking against the sunlight. She stopped for a moment, overwhelmed by the sound of applause. Reporters shouted questions, but she didn't answer. She simply looked up at the sky, free. Back at Kane Technologies, Alexander was in his office when his assistant rushed in, breathless. "Sir, she's been cleared. They found the real thief." He looked up, confused. "What?" The assistant placed a tablet in front of him. The footage played silently. Benjamin Cole entering his office, opening the safe. Alexander stared, frozen. His face went pale. Each second on that screen was a knife twisting deeper into his chest. He pressed pause halfway through, unable to look anymore. Benjamin, the man he had trusted with everything, his company, his reputation, his home, and he had believed him over Clara. The guilt hit like a physical weight. His breath caught. His throat tightened. He had accused an innocent woman, humiliated her, and broken his daughter's heart, all because he'd been too proud to question his own judgment. He pressed a hand against his forehead, eyes closing. The world around him blurred into a haze of regret. That night, Benjamin was summoned to Alexander's office. When he entered, he found Alexander standing by the window, the city lights reflecting off the glass. Without a word, Alexander turned the tablet around and hit play. The video ran. Benjamin's face changed instantly. He stammered, tried to speak. "Alexander, it's not what it looks like." "You opened my safe," Alexander said quietly. "You touched what wasn't yours." Benjamin swallowed hard, his words crumbling. You were stealing from me," Alexander cut him off. His voice wasn't loud, but it was lethal. "And you blamed her." The office door opened. 2 security guards stepped in, followed by 2 police officers. Benjamin's face fell. "Alex, please." But Alexander didn't respond. He simply handed the USB to the officers. "I'm done listening to lies." Benjamin Cole was arrested on the spot, his silence the only confession left. As the door closed behind him, Alexander stood alone in the dim light. He exhaled shakily, the weight of his own actions pressing down on him. Down the road. At that exact same hour, Clara sat in a small car heading home, free for the first time in weeks, but unsure of what kind of world she was returning to. All she knew was that one small girl, one act of courage, had turned the tide of her life forever. That night, the Kane estate stood still beneath the soft drizzle of rain. The lights glowed behind tall windows, but the house itself seemed to be holding its breath, as if waiting for something that had been missing far too long. Down the road, a dark sedan pulled up by the gates. The car door opened and Clara stepped out slowly. She wore the same clothes she had been arrested in, wrinkled, faded, but clean. The air was cold, but her heart beat fast. When the front doors opened, Lily was already there. She didn't hesitate. She ran, barefoot across the polished floor, and threw herself into Clara's arms. Clara dropped her small suitcase and caught her mid-air, clutching her tight. Neither spoke. The only sound was the muffled sob of a child who had been holding back tears for too many days. The staff watched quietly from the hallway, some covering their mouths, some wiping their eyes. Even Mrs. Turner stood still, whispering softly, "Thank God." For a long moment, the house, once cold and silent, felt alive again. When Clara finally pulled back, she brushed Lily's hair away and smiled faintly. "You did it," she whispered. "You found the truth." Lily shook her head. "We did." Their embrace said what words couldn't. Minutes later, Alexander appeared at the top of the staircase. He didn't move at first, just stood there, looking down at the scene below. Clara and Lily together again, framed by the warm glow of the chandeliers. He descended the steps slowly, each one heavier than the last. When he reached the bottom, the room grew quiet. "Clara," he said softly. She turned. The exhaustion on her face couldn't hide the strength in her eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Alexander exhaled, voice trembling with guilt. "I'm sorry. It wasn't just an apology. It was confession, surrender, acknowledgement, years of pride collapsing into one sentence. I'm sorry for everything," he continued. "For doubting you, for hurting you, for not protecting you when I should have." Clara nodded slowly. "I know," she said quietly. There was no anger in her tone, only a deep, tired sadness. He didn't expect forgiveness. But she didn't turn away either. "I'll never undo what I did," Alexander said. "But I'll spend the rest of my life making sure Lily and you never doubt me again." She looked at him for a long time. "Don't say it," she replied gently. "Show it." That night, the house began to breathe again. Lily insisted that Clara stay in her room for the first night. She wanted her close, afraid that if she let go, everything would vanish again. Clara agreed, lying beside her until the girl's breathing slowed into sleep. Down the hall, Alexander sat alone in his office, the same room where his mistakes had begun. He stared at the empty safe and the faint reflection of himself in the glass cabinet, a man unrecognizable from the one who once thought power could solve everything. He closed his laptop, stood up, and for the first time in years, left his work unfinished. The next morning, sunlight filled the halls. The staff whispered, the air lighter than it had been in months. Lily's laughter returned to the kitchen, soft, cautious, but real. Clara cooked breakfast, her movements steady. She didn't act as if everything had been fixed overnight, because it hadn't. But she stayed. That choice alone spoke louder than any words could. Over the next few days, routines began to return. Lily helped Clara unpack her suitcase, folding her few clothes neatly into drawers. She asked if they could start gardening again, and Clara smiled. Of course. When they returned to Rosewood Garden, the flowers were wilted, the soil hard and dry. But together they began again, turning the dirt, planting new seeds, watering patiently. Lily laughed when her hands got dirty. Clara just smiled and said, "Good things take time." Sometimes Alexander would stand by the window watching them. Not from distance now, from reflection. He was learning quietly to be present. One morning he joined them in the garden. He knelt beside Lily, clumsily helping her plant a rose bush. She giggled. "You're not doing it right, Daddy." "I'm learning," he said. And for once, he meant it. That evening they had dinner together, all three of them. It wasn't grand or fancy, just warm. Conversation came slowly at first, like testing old rusted hinges. But it came. Alexander asked Lily about her day. She told him about watering the garden and teaching Clara how to plant properly. They laughed, and the sound felt strange in that house, new, fragile and necessary. Later, after dinner, Alexander stopped by Clara's door. "Thank you," he said. She looked up from folding linens. "For what?" "For staying." "You didn't have to." Clara hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Lily deserves stability, and maybe so do you." That night the mansion didn't feel like a monument of wealth anymore. It felt like a home. Upstairs, Lily slept peacefully between dreams and warmth. Clara checked on her one last time before turning off the lamp. Alexander, in the study, didn't drown himself in emails or calls. He just sat quietly, listening to the rain outside and the faint sound of his daughter's laughter echoing in memory. They were still healing, all of them. But healing doesn't happen through grand gestures. It happens in quiet dinners, shared mornings, and the simple act of trying again. For the first time since Evelyn's death, Alexander Kane wasn't running from the past. He was facing it, surrounded not by money but by people who reminded him what love actually looked like. And somewhere deep inside, under the weight of everything they had endured, the Kane estate finally exhaled. After weeks of therapy, quiet hope began to take physical form. What had once been still and lifeless, the legs of Judge William Hayes, were now beginning to respond. Small tremors, faint movements, barely visible twitches. But to those who had been there since the start, they were miracles. Each morning, the sterile air of St. Helena Rehabilitation Center filled with a rhythm, the hum of machines, the soft count of therapists, and Lily's clear, unwavering voice. "One more time," she would say, gripping his hand gently. "You can do it." Judge Hayes had seen the worst of humanity in courtrooms: deceit, greed, cruelty. Yet this child, who owed him nothing, sat beside him through every painful exercise as if his healing were her only mission. At first he had agreed to therapy out of politeness. Now he came alive for it. Alexander stood back most days, watching through the glass wall. He saw how Lily's encouragement sparked something even science couldn't measure. The doctors had begun to notice it too. Whenever she was present, Hayes's progress accelerated. "She's his anchor," one therapist said quietly. "Hope reacts to connection." And it was true. Lily drew small pictures during sessions, drawings of him standing, walking, even running. She taped them to the wall where he could see them while practicing his balance. "That's what's next," she'd say proudly. Each day the judge grew stronger. First his toes, then his ankles. Within weeks, he was able to push against the therapist's support bars, muscles trembling with effort, but responding. When the doctors confirmed measurable improvement, word spread. The press picked it up again. Judge from viral courtroom case shows miraculous recovery. The story that had started with a child's promise was now becoming proof of willpower and compassion. But inside the therapy room, none of that mattered. What mattered was the sound of Lily's laughter when Hayes took his first assisted steps with a walker. "See? You're standing," she shouted, clapping her hands. Hayes, pale and breathless, looked at her and smiled. "Because you told me I could." That moment stayed with everyone in the room. Even the medical team stepped back, giving space for the miracle that didn't belong to science alone. Over time, Alexander began showing up more often, not just as a financier or a father, but as a man learning how to show up at all. He would sit with Lily during sessions, asking questions about the therapy, talking to Hayes, and helping with the exercises when he could. For the first time, Lily had both the people she loved in the same room, working towards something selfless. Clara often joined them, her quiet presence a steady current beneath the emotion of the process. There were hard days too, painful sessions that ended in exhaustion and silence. Sometimes Hayes would grip the parallel bars, sweat dripping down his forehead, whispering, "I can't today," and Lily would step forward, eyes fierce, voice soft. "You promised me you'd try, remember?" He always did. The therapy continued for months. Each session layered strength over doubt, determination over fatigue. And then, one afternoon, something remarkable happened. Judge Hayes took 3 steps on his own. No walker, no therapist holding his arms. Just 3 trembling, deliberate steps. The room erupted in cheers, but Lily said nothing. She just walked up, tears welling in her eyes, and whispered, "I told you." That night, the Kane estate felt brighter than ever. Lily sat in the living room, sketching another picture, this time of a man standing tall in front of a courtroom. When Alexander walked in, she held it up proudly. "This one's for him," she said. Alexander sat beside her. "For the judge?" She nodded. He kept his promise. Alexander smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "And so did you." He looked at her. His daughter, who had taught him more about humanity than all his years in business ever had. For the first time, he wasn't ashamed to feel emotional. Days later, the rehabilitation team invited Judge Hayes to return to the Riverton courthouse, not for work, but for something symbolic. A visit, a thank you. When he agreed, the news spread across the country. Reporters, legal staff, and even former colleagues gathered that morning, waiting in anticipation. The courthouse lobby buzzed with whispers as the doors opened. Hayes entered sitting in his wheelchair, a nurse and 2 therapists beside him. Lily and Alexander followed close behind. Cameras flashed, but then, instead of staying seated, the judge gripped the handles of his walker. The noise fell away. Slowly, with trembling effort, he stood. A hush spread through the crowd. Even the cameras stopped clicking for a moment. Hayes looked around the room. The same place he had once ruled from the bench, now filled with disbelief and awe. He took his first step, then another, each one deliberate, painful, perfect. Gasps turned to tears. Lily clapped, her small voice trembling. "You're doing it!" Hayes reached the center of the courtroom and turned to face the audience. His voice, though soft, filled the space. "I never thought I'd stand here again, but I owe this moment not to medicine or miracles, but to a little girl who reminded me that faith can move what fear cannot." He looked at Lily. "You kept your promise." The crowd erupted into applause. Reporters cried. Clerks clapped. Even stoic attorneys wiped their eyes. Lily ran forward, hugging him tightly, her face pressed against his chest, her tiny hands gripping his coat. He placed a trembling hand on her back, whispering, "Thank you, my brave girl." At the edge of the room, Clara stood silently, hand over her heart. Alexander beside her, unable to hide the tears that blurred his vision. He watched his daughter, the child who had restored everything he didn't know he'd lost. When the noise died down, Alexander was asked to say a few words. He hesitated, then stepped forward, microphone trembling in his hand. "My daughter taught me something I'll never forget," he began. "That power can build walls, but love breaks them down. That truth isn't found in proof. It's found in people who don't give up." He paused, eyes finding Lily. "She didn't just help a judge walk again. She helped me learn how to live." Applause thundered through the room again. That day, something changed in everyone who witnessed it. The story wasn't about justice anymore. It was about second chances, courage, and the power of a child's heart to heal what adults destroy. For the first time, Alexander, Clara, Lily, and Hayes stood under the same roof, not as victims of circumstance, but as proof that compassion could turn ruin into redemption. And as they left the courthouse together, the world outside erupted with camera flashes, cheers, and headlines that would carry one name again and again: Lily Kane, the girl who kept her promise. Months passed, and the story of Lily Kane and the judge who stood again became a symbol that traveled far beyond Riverton. What had begun as tragedy had turned into something greater, a testament to truth, courage, and quiet love. Yet inside the Kane estate, life had slowed into something beautifully ordinary. The marble halls that once echoed with loneliness now carried laughter. The lights, once cold, glowed warm at dusk. The silence that had haunted every room was replaced by the small sounds of living, pages turning, footsteps running. The faint melody of a piano Lily had convinced her father to buy. Alexander had changed in ways no one expected. He no longer measured his days in profits or meetings. He worked fewer hours, spent more mornings at breakfast, and sometimes just sat watching Clara and Lily in the garden, the two people who had pulled him back from the life he'd built like armor. He still carried guilt. It never left entirely, but he had learned to turn it into purpose. That purpose took form in the Lily Hope Foundation. It started quietly, just an idea whispered between him and Judge Hayes. If a child's voice could save one life, Hayes had said, imagine what 100 could do. Within months, the foundation was born, built to help children caught in injustice, to give families like Clara's a voice in systems that too often ignored them. Clara became its heart. She worked directly with families, not from an office, but in living rooms, schools, and shelters. She listened. She comforted. Her calm presence, once a quiet strength inside one house, now spread to many. Judge Hayes joined as senior advisor, his story giving credibility to a mission that was more human than legal. We're not fixing the law, he told new staff. "We're fixing faith in people." And Lily, though still too young to understand her influence, became the foundation's symbol. Photos of her in the courtroom hung on walls, not as trophies, but as reminders of what empathy could do when courage refused to stay silent. The media still called her Lily the Brave, but at home she was simply Lily. She still spilled milk at breakfast, still begged for pancakes every Sunday, and still made Clara read her bedtime stories even when she knew every word by heart. Their family wasn't traditional, not by blood or title, but it was whole. One evening, the house filled with the soft orange light of sunset. Lily sat on the living room floor surrounded by photo albums, while Clara folded laundry nearby. Alexander stood at the window, watching the sky turn gold over Rosewood Garden. "Do you think Mommy's proud of us?" Lily asked suddenly, looking up from a picture of her late mother. Clara paused. Alexander turned slowly. He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I know she is," he said. "She's the reason we found each other." Lily smiled, small, knowing, content. Outside, the garden was blooming again. Roses, lavender, lilies, the same flowers Clara had planted with her months ago now stood tall and bright. Their scent drifted through the open windows, soft and sweet. Later that week, Judge Hayes visited. He no longer used a walker, just a cane now, more for habit than need. When Lily saw him, she ran straight into his arms. "You're walking perfectly," she exclaimed. He smiled. "Because I had the best teacher." They laughed, standing in the same sunlight that had once seen them both broken. That afternoon, they gathered in the garden, Alexander, Clara, Lily, and Hayes, 4 lives that had once collided through pain. Now bound by redemption, they didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The air itself felt complete. As the sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the Kane estate, Alexander turned to Clara. "You know," he said softly, "this house used to feel like a monument to everything I'd lost. But now, it feels alive again," Clara smiled, "because it finally has a heart." Lily twirled nearby, her laughter blending with the sound of evening wind. Judge Hayes leaned on his cane, watching the family that had changed his life. "Second chances," he murmured, "don't come often. But when they do, they rebuild more than just people. They rebuild the world around them." Alexander nodded. And all it took was one promise. The 4 of them stood together as the last light faded. A family not by fate, but by choice. Inside, the clocks ticked softly, marking time not as loss, but as life continuing. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Alexander walked through the quiet house one last time. He paused at Lily's door. She was asleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit, the faintest smile on her lips. He whispered, "Thank you," though she couldn't hear him. Then, in the hallway, he passed the framed newspaper clipping, the photo of Lily holding Judge Hayes's hands in the courtroom. Beneath it, in small engraved letters, the Foundation's motto read, "Truth heals, love restores." Alexander touched the frame gently and turned off the light. Outside, the wind carried the scent of roses through the night, whispering through open windows and across the marble floors of a house that had once been cold, but was now, finally, a home. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm truly grateful that you stayed till the very last moment. It means more than you can imagine. Every story we tell here carries a piece of truth, emotion, and hope. And I hope this one touched your heart in some way. Tell me in the comments what part moved you the most, or which moment you'll remember after watching. I read every comment. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this. Until next time, stay kind and keep believing in humanity.